Hello, my friends. D.L. Anderson here. Welcome back to Transformation by Truth podcast as we share the truth concerning these last days and what you must do to save yourself from the violent times that are just ahead. Today's podcast is a word of truth accounting of the end times. The end is coming. The end is near. Today's podcast is entitled End Times 441, Reigning Over Contempt, Part 1, The Maid of Honor and Her Tall Task of Fixing Your Heart. The podcast objectives are analyze the primary illustration of virtue, analyze the key to preparing your heart to do the Father's will, and analyze what it means to have a regulated heart. The primary illustration of virtue. Shalom, my beloved brothers and sisters, and welcome to day 269 of our exposition of lawlessness. In the most recent podcast, we analyze the power and prominence of virtue and the critical role that virtue will play in our survival in these last days. We also laid a foundation for understanding the key to reigning over contempt. Vis-a-vis, we must keep ourselves from all defilement for the following reason, which I will offer as an inflection point. Consider this and be advised. Defilement is the primary disqualifier as it pertains to operating in the powers of the Ruach. Ergo, the key to reigning over contempt is eliminating every manner of defilement from your life and guarding yourself from future defilement. All you have to do is follow the precepts of honesty, righteousness, and purification, and your heart and mind will be consistently clean. Now, procedurally speaking, the key to keeping your heart consistently clean is by operating in every illustration of virtue, which should come as no surprise. If you recall, we applied the same rule to obedience and faith. Along these lines, we found that the key to unlocking the primary illustrations of obedience and faith is unlocking the primary illustrations of their secondary degrees. In doing so, we succeeded in unlocking the fence of faith and the arm guard and watchman of obedience, three key features which allowed us to achieve the critical process of mind regulation. To our good fortune, we are now positioned to unlock another leading hero of holiness, and yet the illustration of virtue is a heroine. Enter the maid of honor. Now, although virtue's role as the maid of honor is easily understood, I would not have you underestimate the difficulty in her task. In fact, a strong case could be made that her role is more difficult than any role we have analyzed thus far. Here is why. The maid of honor is not only tasked with purifying your heart from past defilement, quite the contrary, she is also tasked with keeping your heart consistently clean. And this task is even greater than the first. Now, the question we should chiefly entertain is this: how is keeping your heart consistently clean more difficult than cleansing your heart from years of past defilement? The answer is sure. The latter is a one-time event, and the former is a process that must continue every day for the rest of your life. Along these lines, the initial work of virtue is to purify your heart from past defilement. True, this work is indeed a heavy lift, but also true, it only happens one time, for it is in the likeness of water baptism, which also does save us. On the other hand, the constant purification that happens after the initial work is a task your maid of honor must perform every day. The reason why is crucial, and I will offer it as an inflection point. Consider this, my friends, and be advised. Even with all the appropriate safeguards in place, your heart, unlike your mind, is desperately wicked, and it is difficult to know what is truly in your heart until you form an intention. Ergo, some of the bad actors in your heart will work to recreate an environment of contempt, and your maid of honor will routinely have to snuff them out before any seeds of lawlessness take root. Now, if I had more time, I would go into greater detail concerning this process, and I may do so in a future podcast. For now, you should consider the most prominent manner in which our hearts could revert back to their defiled nature. Consider this, my friends, and also be advised. The easiest way to contaminate a pure heart is by interacting with someone who has a heart of contempt. My dear friends, I have been saying this all along and for many days. Vis-a-vis, you must be careful of the spiritual company you keep. For why would you contaminate a pure heart with a heart of contempt? Listen to me. Your maid of honor has a tall enough task as it is. Why would you make her life harder? Remember, the Holy Spirit will leave you if you grieve him. And trust me, if you bring to naught any of his gifts, he is grieved. So, take my advice and listen. Here is the one thing you must do. Stay away from rebels and willful sinners, for you will find it true. The worst attributes in these transgressors will bring out the worst in you. My heart is fixed, O Elohim. Now, understanding the critical nature of the persistent purification of the heart, we should analyze this process to better appreciate the role of your maid of honor. Along these lines, the prime objective of virtue in the heart is similar to the prime objective of obedience and faith in the mind. If you recall, these leading degrees of holiness are designed to achieve the optimal state of mind via the critical process of mind regulation, a process that begins with faith and is completed via obedience. By definition, mind regulation is the process by which we routinely filter harmful thoughts out of our minds while reserving space for spiritual thoughts that will enhance our meditations and lighten our path. Now, by achieving mind regulation, we achieve a critical milestone in our quest. Vis-a-vis, we eliminate the potential for any evil thoughts to get into our hearts by first eliminating them from our minds. Here is why this is so important. The easiest way to develop evil intentions in your heart is by generating evil thoughts within your mind. Remember, the mind is the gateway to the soul, and it is directly connected to your heart. vis-a-vis the thoughts generated within your mind have a clear and direct path into your heart. Ergo, if you don't get your mind right, you have no hope for cleansing your heart. Alas, any progress you make in your heart would be eventually compromised by the lack of regulation within your mind. Ergo, it should be clear that we must achieve a certain level of regulation within our hearts. Now that we have regulated our minds via the powers of obedience and faith, and we achieve said regulation by allowing the power of virtue to create a clean heart within us that is fixed. Now, this brings us to the question of the hour. That is, what does it mean to have a heart that is fixed? The answer is sure, and I had to do some research to arrive at the answer. When the psalmist reveals that his heart is fixed, he is revealing that his heart is firm, steadfast, adjusted, and most of all, it is prepared. This begs the question, if your heart has been fixed, what are you prepared to do? The answer is sure. You are prepared to do the Father's will. We know this because the primary objective of virtue is to cause you to choose to do the Father's will. And the man or woman who chooses to do the Father's will in his or her heart is prepared to do his will. My dear friends, this is what it means to have a heart that is fixed. This is the first step in regulating your heart, the same way obedience and faith have regulated your mind. Psalm 57:7 is revealing, my heart is fixed, O Elohim. My heart is fixed. I will sing and praise you. Psalm 108:1, O Elohim, my heart is fixed. I will sing and give praise, even my esteem. Psalm 112, 1-7. Praise Yah. Blessed is the man who fears Yahuwah, who has greatly delighted in his commands. He is not afraid of an evil report. His heart is fixed, trusting in Yahuwah. One of the greatest works of all time. Now, it goes without saying that having your heart fixed is critical in your ability to reign over contempt. The reason why is sure. A fixed heart is a regulated heart, and your maid of honor can only do her work in a heart that is depicted by a regulated environment. By definition, a regulated heart is a heart that is free of evil intentions and possesses all the spiritual mechanisms required to keep the heart consistently clean and the will of Elohim as its treasure. Now, a key line in this definition reveals that our hearts must possess all the spiritual mechanisms required for them to be consistently clean. This speaks to one of the key aspects of having your heart fixed. Vis-a-vis, it must go through a series of adjustments. Like your mind, you must make some key upgrades, and you must make some key eliminations. Along these lines, we have already made 3 key upgrades and 3 key eliminations. To wit, we have added honesty, righteousness, and purification. And we have eliminated dishonesty, unrighteousness, and defilement. My dear friends, you must believe me. This may be the most decisive upgrades you will ever make in your entire being. As I have said before, your heart is much more complicated than your mind. Ergo, it only makes sense that the adjustments you make in your heart will be much greater than the upgrades you made in your mind. For that reason, we will turn our attention to analyzing the primary illustrations of virtue at a finer level to better understand and appreciate the process by which our hearts are fixed. My dear friends, we must come to know what it will take for us to create a regulated environment for our maid of honor to do one of the greatest works of all time, the persistent purification of our beings. And we will begin with the next podcast. Yahuwah bless you until then. Now, here is the final word. O Yahuwah, create in me a clean heart to keep my soul pure and set apart. Brothers and sisters, hear me carefully as I say, the persistent purification of your heart is the most critical and pervasive work of transformation. We know this because purification is the first critical process we achieve after unlocking the power of transformation. Vis-a-vis, the first thing Yahuwah wants us to do in our assimilation into the spiritual image and likeness of Yahushua Messiah is to make ourselves spiritually clean. And the only way we can make ourselves spiritually clean is by the persistent purification of our hearts, which is so powerful and pervasive. This model of purification permeates our minds and even our will. And the heroine who orchestrates this amazingly wonderful process is a virtuous woman, a maid of honor, who initiates the leading act of transformation and cleanses our being every day. For she is faithful to the work of purification, and she will continue until Yahuwah calls us home to stay. Heretofore, I recommend invest in the success of your maid of honor, for she will make you clean inside. And if anyone tries to tell you you can obtain the seal of Elohim without a pure heart, Elohim remains true, and they have all lied. Now, here is today's assignment. Meditate on the word you have heard today. And as always, ask the Father to reveal the truth to you. For the children of Elohim live by conviction. And if he has not convicted you, or if you had not heard him concerning these matters, you should pray until you do. Today, I want you to meditate on the word I have shared. And I want you to prepare your mind and heart to receive what Yahuwah wants you to know concerning what it will take for you to create an environment where your heart is fixed. My dear friends, I want you to consider the power of choosing the Father's will in every situation and how making this choice positions you to always do the Father's will, which is the great work of righteousness, i.e., the focal degree of virtue. And I want you to consider how this is indeed a great power. Explicitly, your decision to do the Father's will prior to receiving his will all but guarantees that you will succeed his will. And so, if you are struggling in any way to maintain a regulated heart that is fixed, this is a podcast you will want to hear. All you have to do is prepare your heart and your mind and be encouraged, for the word of truth is always near. Now, here is what's next. We completed today's podcast, End Times 441, Reigning Over Contempt, Part 1. And the next podcast is entitled End Times 442, Reigning Over Contempt, Part 2. I will post this podcast on Friday, March 28th, 2025. Until then, my friends, continue to be led by the Spirit of Elohim. Continue to watch, continue to pray, continue in fasting, and most of all, continue to be focused, for the end is coming. The end is near.